So whenever I get a new client and they're coming in and one of their main focuses is to work on their core strength, the first thing I check, or one of the first things that I check, is their breathing pattern. So you may have heard of belly breathing or Buddha breathing, but there's actually a lot more behind it. And there's actually a lot of ways that it can be done incorrectly. So I wanted to sort of make sure that we're covering off what things we should be avoiding and what things we should be focusing on. Okay, so when we're talking about breathing, to boil it down and make it really, really simple, there are kind of like three areas that we can breathe into. We can breathe into our low bellies with that nice big Buddha breath or that belly breath. We can breathe into our lower ribs. So if I keep my tummy nice and strong, then I can send my breath into my lower rib cage. Okay, or if I'm holding all of this nice and stable, I can send my breath into my neck. So when it comes to what type of breathing and when to do it, when we're resting, we should only really be using our bellies, because it should be the lowest amount of effort to use our diaphragms only. When we have to do a more taxing activity, then we should be using our core to stay strong and stabilize our backs, and then access the lower ribs. So making sure that there's some nice rib expansion. If we're doing a very high intensity activity, then that's when we start to access our the upper parts of our lungs, so the apical parts of our lungs. Because our lungs are this pyramid shape, right? There isn't as much air exchanged when we use this part as there is down here, because there's just so much more volume down in the bottoms of our lungs, okay? So I know that's a lot of information, but essentially, our belly breathing should be our go-to. And if you forget everything that I talked about today or in this video, the one thing I want you to remember is never suck in. And it's so easy. 99% of the people or the women that I encounter in my practice are all sucking in. It's so common to be breathing in and bringing the belly in and then breathing out and letting the belly pop out. And the reason why I don't want you to do that is because if we think of the air pressure coming up when we breathe in, what happens when we cough, right? All of the air goes down into the pelvic floor, and this can cause issues with leaking or prolapse or all kinds of other things, right? So again, if you forget anything I said in this video at all, it's don't suck in. We should be breathing out with that inhale, that nice big Buddha breath, and then exhaling to bring the belly in, and that's at rest, okay? And this is how we find optimal core function, is allowing the muscles to do what they do. If you have a baby or a toddler, watch their breath, right? So oftentimes they're breathing perfectly, right? So they're inhaling into their tummies, and then they're exhaling to bring the tummy in. But this changes quite early in some children if there's something else going on. I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole. But ideally, again, we want to be breathing out. On that inhale, try it with me, and then exhaling to come in. So the cue that I use is inhale for big belly, exhale to compress. And that compression is your core working properly. So the easiest way to sort of find that connection is to come onto our hands and knees. You can join me here. We're going to imagine there's a string hanging down from one hip bone to the other, right? So it's kind of dangling down like a clothesline here. On that inhale, we're gonna let that clothesline hang down. On that exhale, you're going to pick up that clothesline, flatten the belly. We have to make sure that the spine or the back isn't moving, because something I see a lot is people inhale and then they start to arch because they think, oh, I have to drop the string. So it goes this way with that inhale. And then they go to exhale, and then the belly comes up, but the back also comes up, right? So imagine the skeleton or the spine is like a nice flat table, and the skeleton is just sort of working in the background, not moving at all, right? So back nice and flat, one more time. Inhale, let the belly hang, and then exhale to pick it up. All right, so that's one of the easiest ways to find our core connection. Some of the difficulties that people can have is they just don't know how to relax, right? And so this might take some more practice. If you find that you're one of those people, another position you can try that allows more sort of relaxation throughout the whole body is lying on our sides. So if you're lying down, you're not pushing against the floor with your arms. You're not worried about holding your shape, okay? We're gonna lie on our sides here on a somewhat, firm surface. And again, on that inhale, we're gonna think of allowing that belly to kind of blob down onto the mat or wherever that surface is. And then on that exhale, it's going to retreat back into the pelvis, okay? So again, big inhale. Let that stomach blob down onto the mat, and then exhale, zip her up, or bring the belly back into the pelvic cavity here, okay? So if the hands and knees doesn't work for you, then try this or try both and see what works best. What happens when I tell people, you know what, Ellen, I can't feel the core connection. I can see my belly going in, but I just can't sense it. Well, one thing that I like to suggest is using a balloon. So if you have just a really simple balloon, great. If you don't, and you're wanting to be a little bit more sustainable, you can use one of those metal, like really thin metal straws, and that will provide a certain amount of resistance as well as you blow. Okay, so for this example, it might be easy if I do it, it might be easiest to understand if I do it lying down, because it can be a little bit of a mental trip up, okay? So we're going to think of those really tall standing bike pumps, the ones where you have to hold them with your feet, and then you have to pull the handle up to create or draw in air and push down to blow the air out. So that's the analogy that I'm using for this balloon breathing. If it's your first time, you might want to stretch the balloon out a little bit to make it a little bit easier. Side note, people that tell me, oh, I've never been good at blowing up balloons, often already have some kind of core stuff happening. So this might actually be what you need if you know you're not great at blowing up balloons. So lying on our backs, we're going to think of that bike pump handle being your belly, okay? So that bike pump handle is going to go up. Remember, we're drawing the air into the tummy. When you exhale, you're pushing that bike pump handle down, and we're pushing the air out through the mouth. So it should be a reciprocal movement where the tummy goes up, and then the tummy goes down to blow the air out. So when we add the straw or the balloon, we're creating a certain amount of resistance over the exit, which is your mouth, right? So what ends up happening is when that bike pump handle tries to come down, AKA the muscles try and contract, or your core tries to contract, it has to push against the balloon or the straw, okay? And it's almost this sort of, not tug of war, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like when they're pushing each other. But they're pushing again, I'm thinking of like maybe bulls or something. But they're essentially trying to the tummy is essentially trying to overcome the resistance of the balloon. And I'm spending a lot of time explaining this concept because I know that there are people that still get confused. So kudos to you if you got it on the first explanation. But here we go. So big belly in, and then and this is where it gets awkward because the balloon makes a funny noise, which can be fun. How do you know if you're not doing it correctly? Well, when you try to blow out through the balloon won't blow up, and your belly will actually rise back up because it cannot produce enough force to blow up the balloon, if that makes sense, right? If you're not seeing this, and instead you're seeing this when you blow through your mouth, then you know you're having a little bit of trouble with this. In which case, if you're starting with the balloon, back off to a straw. If you're starting with the metal straw and you're still having trouble, find maybe like a wider diameter straw. Okay, so that's one of the best ways to really feel that core engaging. If you feel like that's helpful, you can also start to do the balloon breathing or the straw breathing in different positions. So we can take it back into hands and knees. So from here, and this was where it gets a little bit tricky because you have to have the mouth strength to hold the balloon in your mouth, or you can go into a straw, right? So you can hold the balloon in your mouth. And being on hands and knees is going to give you a lot more feedback for your core to be active because you're no longer just relaxing on your back or relaxing on your side. To make it even harder, you can do a full plank and blow into the balloon as well. Okay, so that's it for this video. Stay tuned if you want to learn a little bit more about getting the pelvic floor to relax and engage.